friend, Dr. Dennis Cuddy, who, of course, is taught at the university level, who's been a consultant, certainly for industry, who's a prolific writer, who worked with the Department of Education of the Reagan years, but certainly is one of our favorite guests. Well, Dennis, thank you very much for being with us. What are we going to be covering today?
Well, I'm going to be talking about the book I've done, The Power Elite, Their History and Future, but as usual, I try to make some comments about contemporary events. And so I want to start with that. We have a situation like H.G. Wells said when the sort of world state, as he called it, was coming about. The process would speed up. And it used to be, in the past, you would have one crisis followed by another crisis followed by another one. But the way it's looking now, you have multiple crises simultaneously because they have to speed up the process to fulfill the timetable, which is the election of 2016, which I stressed last week. I think it's time for an alternation of power with Jeb Bush coming in. But as I stressed last week, it doesn't have to be him, because they control the whole range of candidates, both Republican and Democrat. But you'll notice that various leading Republican candidates from the recent past, McDonald in Virginia, Scott is having legal problems. He had his trial this week about him and his wife and accepting various favors and so forth and so on, and why that happened. And then, of course, Scott Walker, very popular, but he had some legal difficulties. He's innocent of them. The court found with him, but still there were legal challenges by rather strong opposition in his state. You have Rick Perry under indictment. Seems to be politically motivated, but still, they're trying to dirty him up. Then of course, Chris Christie in New Jersey with his problems. So a lot of the potential Republican presidential candidates are having some negative publicity. We'll put it that way. Jeb Bush is not. Jeb Bush is not. Hillary Clinton on the opposing team, the Democrat Party, has been dirtied up with Benghazi, and then she recently felt the need to apologize to President Obama for her critique about how he was handling foreign affairs, so forth and so on. So, the stage seems to be set for 2016, and then after that, the timetable is for the world currency beginning in 2018, and that's important. Even though the dollar will still be around, and the lira and the yen and the won and the pound and the mark and all those, the economic situation in various countries will have so debased various currencies that people will turn, at least initially, for international transactions to this world currency. And people say, well, what's the big deal with that? Well, whenever you have a world currency, this really does undermine national sovereignty, just like the World Trade Organization with GATT has initially undermined it by putting decisions in the hand of unelected bureaucrats in Europe who literally forced our Congress to change our laws. And we'll pick up after the break.
All right, fine. Well, I guess it's Dr. Dennis Cuddy. And basically, ladies and gentlemen, you must understand there's a small group of people that control both political parties. There may be only 4,000 or 5,000 of them. They're people of great wealth. And they're using the financial and military power of the United States to bring about a one-world government. That's why we have our troops stationed all over the world.
While the storm clouds gather
This is Dr. Stan, and certainly with us today is Dr. Dennis Cuddy, who's taught at the university level, who certainly was in the Reagan administration Department of Education. He certainly has been a consultant to industry. He's a prolific writer, and he's one of our favorite guests here at Radio Liberty. Dr. Cuddy has simply been talking about what's going on behind the scenes, and certainly as we look ahead towards the year 2016, he feels that the Republicans are going to take the presidency, but it's all very rigged. It's all show business. And then by 2018, we'll have a new currency. It's called the Phoenix. And of course, as we then move towards the one world currency, the one world government, and of course, the destruction of Christianity. Go right ahead, Dr. Cuddy.
Yeah, and so you have the world currency set for 2018. And that will set the stage for what Alice Bailey in 1933 said would be the World Federation of Nations taking, she called it, rapid shape by the year 2025, which would be the first year of the next president, assuming that Jeb Bush or whoever gets 2 terms. In fact, that's the trend, 2 terms. And the only reason they broke that with George H.W. Bush back, who was president from 1989 to 1993, was at that point they really wanted GATT and NAFTA passed, and they needed a Democrat president to twist enough Democratic arms in the House and Senate to allow that to get through. They had enough Republican votes, but they needed Democrat votes, and a Democrat president alone could twist enough arms to accomplish that. But otherwise, it's, Reagan was 2 terms, Clinton was 2 terms, George W. was 2 terms, Obama's 2 terms, like that. So that seems to be the scenario that they have in line. And as I said, you have any number of crises showing up. And what you have is the news media just sort of asks these questions and then doesn't even show any curiosity in answering them. Tonight, for example, on the nightly news, they're talking about ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. And they said who is well-funded. And so, the question logically would be, well, what funds? Where they get their funds? Of course, now
who is funding them? And of course, the last thing they want you to know is that we're funding them. Go right ahead.
Right.
That's the enemy money can buy.
That's right. So now, of course, they're able to lose.
Hold that thought. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly Dr. Cuddy is talking about what's going on today, how the media said they never ask the right questions. They talk a lot about ISIS, this a very, very powerful new international terrorist organization, and they comment that they're well-funded, but they never ask the question, who's funding ISIS? Where did it come from? Who is providing the arms? And, well, of course, you go into the background of it, you go up on the Internet, you'll find it was funded by the CIA and trained by the CIA and armed by the CIA, and now we have a new enemy. Go right ahead.
Yeah, and it's, of course, more recently when they take over Mosul and, other places like that, they loot the bank, and get all that money. But originally, yeah, if you track them back, they started to grow in a significant way, of course, in Syria. And they were part of what we'd call the rebels. And, of course, we supported the rebels, arms and funds and so forth. And, of course, we knew they were there, this offshoot of al-Qaeda, named more recently ISIS. But we were funding them and, like that. And the irony for the individual who was just executed by them, Foley, is that he had gone over there to look at what Assad was doing to the poor civilians and the poor rebels who were simply fighting for freedom. And then, of course, it's these poor rebels, ISIS, who actually grabbed them. And, of course, typical of these rebel groups, the ISIS, the more virulent strain of radical Islam, is now killing the more moderate rebels. That's the way it works. Same thing in Iraq, same thing everywhere. And, of course, you can track it back even further than that to Libya. In Libya, the rebels there included al-Qaeda, and a lot of the people who are fighting now and known as ISIS got their start there. And the arms and the money and so forth went from eastern Libya northward to Hamas and to the rebels, quote-unquote, including ISIS, up in Syria, and then as well down south to Boko Haram, the funding and, the weapons and so forth. But the media doesn't, they don't make a point of that. The media, when it covers Boko Haram, who is running all over the place in Nigeria and Niger and Chad and Mali and other countries there in the Maghreb region, They just say, and they're well armed. They don't add. And by the way, they got these arms from the rebels in Libya who we supported. They don't say that. They don't tag on that little sentence there. But that's what happens. And then, of course, Libya is in northern Africa, and that's where that particular British lord that Dr. Stan mentions in the Hansard, which is the British equivalent of our congressional record, basically blurted out one day when he was up for some official post and he was being challenged on it. He says, well, I have provided funds to these terrorists in Africa. And, if you're going to come after me, then I'll refer you to the Bank of England, which sort of put me up to all this. So if you track this thing back, you can see where the funds are coming from, where the arms are coming from. But our news media, New York Times, ABC, CBS, NBC, they don't get into that. They just say the well-armed Boko Haram or the well-funded terrorist group ISIS. But they don't, say they got the weapons because of us, they got the money because of us. And then when you actually look at I think it was called the National Alliance in Libya, which is the lead group when they were overthrowing Gaddafi. Of course, the lead person of that had been here for 20 years, about 5 miles from the CIA headquarters in Langley, getting trained. We train them, we send them back. Oh, look, a rebellion of wonderful democratic, loving rebels, to go there, right? And then here we go. And so the whole thing, if you track it back, sort of like Dr. Stan says, sort of comes back to the CIA. And you say, whoa, that's just isolated. No, it's not isolated. Remember, I said last week that Robert Bayer, the CIA operative in the Middle East for about 25 years, said if we wanted some dirty work done in Qatar, or Qatar they call it, and Yemen and so forth, it was the Muslim Brotherhood doing it for us. For us. So it's not like we were opposed to the Muslim Brotherhood. They were our sort of operatives.
And Robert Baer actually wrote a book where he just laid everything bare, as you might say. But most people would never.
Good one.
Most people never get an opportunity to read the books to know where they are. And when you have somebody at the highest levels of government working for our CIA comes forward and telling the truth, you will never hear it mentioned or see it on radio, or certainly see it mentioned on television. Go right ahead.
One of his 2 books, he had 2 main books, was See No Evil, was one of his Robert Baer's books, where he's describing all this. And same thing, the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, when Nasser, who was the ruler or president of Egypt back in the 50s, interrogated leaders of the Brotherhood, he found out they had already by then been infiltrated by American intelligence, CIA, British intelligence, MI6, the Soviets, and the French already. And also, in the late 50s, 1959, the CIA had Saddam Hussein was one of their guys as a 6-member assassination team. He was assigned to assassinate the prime minister of Iraq, and he was supported by the CIA. Of course, he wasn't very good at it, messed it up, but the CIA took care of him, protected him, supported him, got him out alive, and used him later, just like they used Gaddafi. They looked around and said, well, we'll use this guy, promote him and get him to be head of Libya and so forth. So most of the problems, we're the ones. It's sort of like that Pogo cartoon strip. We have met the enemy and they are us. That's the famous line given in that Pogo cartoon strip. And so if you look at these things and track them back, you can pretty well find out who's behind all this stuff. Now, if we're behind all this stuff, then that should make you suspicious of the movements themselves, and what they do and when they do it, and so on. And so last week I mentioned how Baghdadi, who's the head of ISIS, although he gives us very radical, reactionary, right-wing, strict Islamic teaching, I noticed, and I mentioned last week, that he had this really expensive Western sort of super Rolex-type watch on his arm, which, if you're a good back-to-the-basics Islamist, you don't have anything to do with Western culture. In fact, Boko Haram, that term in Africa means Western culture is awful.
Well, now, didn't this Baghdadi, wasn't he in